Hi, I'm Ewan. I'll be your geek for the next 20 minutes-ish. I'll try and keep it to that if possible. When I learned that my proposal for this talk was accepted, after I scraped myself off the ceiling and started breathing again, I started looking for advice on how to give nice big public talks that were relevant to you guys. And the first piece of advice I found was ask a question, straight up front, ask it, and then repeat it and try to answer. So here we are. We'll review this at the end, of course. I also had a recurring idea, which has been going on in the back of my head for quite some time. It's the idea that as private individuals, we're pretty rich information sources. We trail data streams as we walk about and go about our daily lives, and some of that is from explicit interaction with the world, some of it implicit, some of it things happening on our behalf. And the world of commerce digitizes this, turns it into data, analyzes it, and uses it to target us with products and services. We all work in that world, so we know this pretty intimately. But by comparison, our own relationship with our personal information is pretty utilitarian. In fact, we favor services which will do the grubbing about in that data for us, give us suggestions, make suggestions, act automatically on our behalf. And that puts us one remove from the personal information which we know around us and we begin to take for granted. And I think that might not necessarily be a good thing. So I wanted to do some analysis from a non-commercial perspective and ask the question, what's inside our data? Is there value in it? Is there interest in it? And so I went looking for a couple of data sets, grabbed some of the tools, and this community has some of the best tools for this, and got stuck in. So hence this talk. Here's my first data set. My partner, Lisa, is a hugely tenacious person, and during the early part of our daughter's life, she gathered information on all sorts of things that our daughter was doing. Everything from sleeping to eating and some other stuff which we won't go into much detail about. And after we realized that sleep patterns were something that maybe were going to happen to other people for a while, I started looking at this as a data set, as something that would be interesting to explore. And my daughter's name's Molly, her sleep patterns, or lack of them, became something that we were obsessing about, so I went looking for patterns. The data set that I extracted from Lisa's app as she gathered this information looks like this. It's about 1,100 records over about 6 months. By the way, that's about 6 sleeps a day. I would love to sleep 6 times a day. Lots of naps. So I did some cleanup on it using the tools that we know, just straight JS for the most part, and then used the data-driven documents module, which Mike Bostock built and maintains, to do some visualization of that. And the result was a little bubble bit of SVG styled with some CSS. Now, here's what came out of that. This style of visualization came from an IEEE InfoVis paper about 15 years ago. They use spirals, I'm going to use circles. The way you read it is basically like tree rings. So each concentric circle is a day. An arc in a circle represents a period of sleep or an event with a duration. And as you move from the inside out, time moves forward. So the earlier days in the beginning and towards 6 months old, the latest period of Molly's life was around the outside. So you can see some patterns just at a glance. Top right-hand corner there, you can pretty much see that Molly sleeps at night. And there are other patterns in there which are interesting to me, at least. Now, what did I learn from that? Pretty straightforward. She sleeps at night, right? You can look at the visualization code if you're interested. It's sitting up on GitHub. But what really I got from this was a bit of facility with the tools, and I became hooked on small data, small scale, personal level information about what's happening around me, what's happening in my environment, and stuff that's about me. So I went looking for more of this. So the second data set was an attempt to do this at slightly larger scale, or to understand more and to do something a bit more rich. So I was on a flight from my hometown, Glasgow, to London a while ago, and this kind of stretches the definition of personal a little bit. There's 150 other people sitting on this tube with wings with me, so I suppose personal doesn't necessarily need to mean private, but it's still personal because it occurred to me, it happened to me. And this time I got 2 streams of data. When we boarded the plane and sat down, I enabled all of the embarrassing set of sensors on my phone, started recording from them, and all the way through the flight. And then at the end, when we opened the doors and got off, I went looking for flight telemetry to match it. And I wanted to put the two together and put a timeline of the trip together. Now, the second set, the flight telemetry, interestingly, comes from the nose of the plane. So most commercial planes that we're on will broadcast this ADSB, Automatic Dependent Broadcast service, which you can listen to over the air. So I used a service to extract that information and put the two together. And here's the result. So this looks like an explosion in a spaghetti factory, so I'll try and give you a bit of detail on it. The top row is a sample of sensors from my phone, a small set of them. The dark blue line is sound level. So you can see just before takeoff, it's nice and quiet, and then there's a spike as the throttle is thrown to full and we take off. And the orange, by comparison, is the pitch of the plane's nose. So you can see it spikes as well as we take off and then levels off into the cruise. And the other one, this is interesting, the light blue line, which does this nice ascent, cruise, and descent shape, that's from air pressure. My phone has an air pressure sensor. That's an epic thing in its own right. But you can also see in the second row, and this is from flight telemetry, that slightly peachy line and the green line alongside it mirror the air pressure one. So that's speed, excuse me, and altitude. So obviously the higher you get, lower air pressure, lower resistance, and higher velocity. The bottom row then you get to see latitude and longitude, which is what the plane was taking from its GPS sensors, and it was roughly a north to south, west to east flight, so you can see that as well. And you can see the little wibbly bits on the far right there, those little bounces, are when we're doing donuts, sitting and holding, waiting to get into Heathrow Airport, something that I'm pretty sure you guys are going to have towards the end of this week. And that was also interesting, but still kind of just for fun and a bit more in depth. But the most interesting thing I found out of that was, despite the total nerdery of being able to put that timeline together, D3 was extremely useful for that capability. What was most interesting is the fact that the data stream that came out of the plane is broadcast in the clear. So if you've got like a Freeview USB dongle and the right software, you can listen to all of the planes sitting over your head right now. So you get that information in the clear. And yet, there's still a business in extracting it, providing an API, and then letting me time and place shift it. That was pretty epic in its own right as well. But these first two data sets were really just, they're kind of warm-ups. I was basically trying to learn the tools, trying to work out whether there was something of real value to me there. And what I got next was a broader data set, which kind of happened to me by accident, which I'll explain a little bit about too. So I was doing a tax return a few years ago. I was looking for bank transaction details, and I was searching through my online banking service. And it was kind of limited. The search syntax is limited. The number of results that I can get back from a search is boxed, so I can only get up to 100, 150, something like that. I can only search within a couple of month window, and when I was paging back and forth between those pages of results, the pager was broken. So at this point, my knuckles were white, and I was getting a little bit shaky, and I thought, the UX is not good. But I'll give an apology for retail banks. This is not their core. They provide transaction services, and they've got a UX on top of that. They've got an online service. That's changing over time, but they're a product of their environment, right? It's like a couple of thousand-year-old tradition of bricks and mortar banks who are just learning to do online. So it's a slow process. So anyway, regardless, I got angry, and I wrote some code. Possibly not the best state of mind for that, but it still goes. And this time what I used was the headless browser project, PhantomJS. That's a very, very cool tool in its own right as well. Not very many others like it. This community has some pretty unique stuff around. But on top of that, I use Casper.js to automate it. It gives you a kind of a promisey, more declarative way of automating scraping tasks, basically. Now, there are commercial services which will do this sort of banking feed for you, but I'm one guy, and plus that wouldn't really have been as much fun. Now, I did some conditioning on this. I used D3 as well as JS together to do that, and then the same presentation and rendering. And this is what that looks like. Now, straight off the bat, there's lots of big things to see here, but I'll describe what you're looking at first. The green bars are a month roll-up of my credits, and the red bars underneath are a month roll-up of debits. So you can see that the white line, which is balance, is pushed up by credits and pulled down by debits. And there's Also, slightly smaller details in here. You can see that tiny sawtooth pattern. That's basically the sort of monthly, yay, cash, boo, payment cycle that happens through economy everywhere, and imagine happens to most of us. But at that distance, and I hope even at the back, the far left there shows you some pretty big obvious things, right? So way off on the left, that mid-sized spike, I'll tell you what that is. That was a breakup. We split up, we sold a house, and that was the house proceeds. So you can see that hitting my bank account and then leaving just as quick as you'd expect. Now, the second spike, I'm not going to tell you what that is. However, afterwards, if you can come to me and make an educated guess on what that is, I'll give you a prize. So I'll come back to this and I'll repeat it, but what's the big spike? But the whole point of this was me for writing a search and to be able to explore it and to look at, a 10-year, pretty rich history of my life. So I did that and I started asking the big questions. This is a decade of pizza I've eaten. It's a bit of a damning record, to be honest, but so be it. That's about £4,500 I've spent over 10 years on pizza. Okay, thank you. But it dropped off embarrassing. Actually, the average bill here is not that high. £15 for a session of pizza is relatively low, especially for this type of group, right? So sometime around about 2009, 2010, my pizza intake dropped off. And at the time, I don't remember anything that would have triggered that, but clearly something did. Maybe I was going outside more often, maybe I took up animal husbandry or something, I don't know. No. I went to the zoo exactly once in the last 10 years, and this is the only time I've been since. I'm going to rectify that, but so goes. Incidentally, it was Five Sisters Zoo outside Edinburgh in West Calder. If you've got some time for a little road trip after this show, I'd recommend it. They let you feed lemurs. You can go inside the cage, but I digress more than a little bit. Now, fun and toys aside, there was some important reasons for doing this as well. For example, this is a view of the sort of profit and loss of having a current account over 10 years, or having my current account over 10 years. And the first thing I found was that I was receiving interest for having positive balances up until about 2008, 2009. And then the current account, the bank stopped paying interest on positive balances. And that's something that I was vaguely aware of, but now that I see it properly, I can understand that it clarifies my relationship with the retail bank. Also, over time, the cost of having a current account has gone up, so that also clarifies things for me and lets me look at things that can maybe be done a little bit better on a personal level. Overall, I think I'm probably up about 22 quid a year for having a current account, but that's all from that set of spikes over on the left. That's not recent. But I did ask some more important questions as well, and this is the last view I'll show you of it. This is a view of my income over 10 years. Some of it's contract work, some salaried, some underemployed. And that comes to about 314k in 10 years. That average is about 30k a year. That might sound good, might sound bad, but it is an average. So there's definitely a slope in there. Now, this struck me as important, specifically in the tech industry, where we have imbalances due to diversity and issues with inclusivity. And that sometimes shows up. There are symptoms which show up in benefits packages, in remuneration. So I think we'd probably benefit from more open conversations about exactly this type of topic. I'm not necessarily saying we throw open the doors to personal accounts and everyone shares absolutely everything, but having a view on it might make some sense. So slightly coyly, rather than just showing you an average and showing you the actual value, if you can guess, or if you can find out from this information what my salary is, I will give you a prize. The information you need to know is that my job post is senior engineer at SparkPost. And if you can come to me afterwards, and one guess per person, please, then I'll give you a prize. No gradient descent, please. Right. While I was doing all of this, and while I was looking at all of this fun data, and I've barely scratched the surface of it, this article came up. Someone posted an anonymous spreadsheet asking for salary information for people in the tech industry. Now, anonymous Google sheet, not the best of ways to gather data, but it was interesting nonetheless, and there was useful data in it. So I dug out just the gender information, and as a caveat, gender is not the whole of diversity. It's obviously a subset of it, but it's an important part of it, and there was data here, so worth extracting. And the imbalance is pretty clear. The folk who said that, or who identified themselves as male, were 90-odd%. More people said they were unspecified, wouldn't give a gender, than used the term female, and only one person used the cis prefix on their gender. So that's clearly an issue that we don't even have vocabulary to discuss this issue. So there's something very, very wrong that needs worked on. Now, all of that aside, 3 people also self-identified as attack helicopter in this case. So I think the only thing we can say about that is please validate your input. Okay, so that was 3 data sets in quick succession, 2 for fun and 1 maybe a little more serious. Did I learn anything? Was there any value to it? Like I said, I kind of only scratched the surface here. I'm kind of hooked on the idea of environmental and contextual local data now. I think there's plenty more to do here. I think there's probably opportunities for conversations and tools in the personal finance world on a colloquial and on a community basis, not professionally, to try and redress the balance to some degree, or at least analyze it and to introspect as a group. This is important, I think, because we spend a lot of time on the how of software development. We talk about making and using tools, which tools work, and that makes sense. Software is the most malleable engineering medium we've ever devised, but it's also the most complex. So it makes sense that we spend a lot of time talking about it, looking at it, and picking over the remains of it over time. But just once I asked a what question, and thank you for the impetus for that, by the way, people. But I learned about my surroundings, I learned about some new tools, I learned about the industry and our community, and now I'm hooked, I'm going to have to go and do more. There's just no 2 ways about it. So I was reading advice on how to give talks, and the final piece of advice I got was to end on a quote if you don't have a strong conclusion. And so here goes. Life moves pretty fast. If we don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Thank you.